Never know how much better you would be if you had not been spanked. You'll never know how much more self-esteem you would have had without that trauma in your past. Yes, I call getting beaten by someone who is far bigger, someone you love and rely on for everything, traumatic. I know it was to me.
Yeah. So Teray, generally speaking, is correct. And also in the article, Dr. Stacey Patton is quoted. The reason why so many African Americans say that they were spanked is because prior to 1910 and prior to the Great Migration, the Great Migration basically starts in 1915, 90% of African Americans lived in the South, basically as a result of slavery. So during slavery, we were beaten. We were beaten by slave owners, slave overseers, etc. Our children were beaten, and that behavior continued after slavery.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. In our final conversation, I wanted to talk about something that we have talked about, which is part of parenting in the Black community. But more importantly, I wanted to talk about normalizing corporal punishment, how there is a growing number of voices around the punishment or the discipline strategy of spanking. And this came up among, I was reading a post by the brother Torre, who wrote for the Griot, and he wrote this piece called "Spanking is a Holdover from Slavery, so Stop Hitting Your Kids." His opinion is that spanking is perceived as a Black thing, but it's really a white European tradition that we adopted. And I wanted to have my brother Michael Imhotep, to give us some insight into this phenomenon of how we discipline children, especially using spanking. So let me bring my brother back into the discussion. Here's one of the things that Torre said in his piece when we're looking at the situation of spanking. I'm just going to pull this up here very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Right.
He shared with us, Brother Michael, this. Keena, let's put the first quote up on the screen. The General Social Survey in 2021 found that 37% of Americans support spanking, including 43% of Republicans and 30% of Democrats. Among working class people, 43% are pro spanking, while 34% of middle class people are, and 43% of Black people support spanking, while only 36% of what white people do. Now, as he's having this conversation, Brother Michael, talking about this, he's made the point that a lot of people will say this: I got spanked and I turned out fine. And we heard that from Black folks. He said, right, well, I want our kids to turn out a lot better than fine. My bar is higher than that, but also you'll never know how much better you will be if you had not been spanked. You'll never know how much more self-esteem you would have had without that trauma in your past. Yes, I call getting beaten by someone who is far bigger, someone you love and rely on for everything, traumatic. I know it was to me.
Yeah. So Teray, generally speaking, is correct. And also in the article, Dr. Stacey Patton is quoted. The reason why so many African Americans say that they were spanked is because prior to 1910 and prior to the Great Migration, the Great Migration basically starts in 1915, 90% of African Americans lived in the South, basically as a result of slavery. So during slavery, we were beaten. We were beaten by slave owners, slave overseers, etc. Our children were beaten, and that behavior continued after slavery. Okay, so when you look at, for instance, I just posted an article here in the chat, and this is something I covered some years ago on the African History Network show. We look at this article here from July 23rd, 2014 from CNN.com. Spanking the gray matter out of our kids. Spanking the gray matter out of our kids. And it talks about how science tells, researchers say physical punishment actually alters the brain, not only in an I'm traumatized kind of way, but also in an I literally have less gray brain matter in my brain. exposing children to harsh corporal punishment may have detrimental effects on trajectories of brain development. One 2009 study concluded. Now, there's more information that's come out since 2013, 2014, but there's studies that deal with this. ScienceDaily.com has an article from December 11th, 2013. I'll post a link here. Spanking children slows cognitive development and increases risk of criminal behavior, experts say. Okay, wow. So we have to understand that during the enslavement process, especially here in this country, African people were stripped of our normal, our regular our various African cultures. We were stripped of our folklore, our mores, our cultures, spiritual systems, names, largely history, things like this. We tried to recreate these African societies on the various slave plantations. At the same time, we're dealing with horrific conditions. Okay. And unfortunately, a lot of those behaviors that were learned on the plantation, the negative behaviors, we continued afterwards. Okay. After slavery ended. So yeah, they're absolutely correct with this. Now, they go, Dr. Stacey Patton, and do you want to go to screen quote 3, or you want me to
just let's go to quote 3, brother. Yes, sir. Let's go to quote 3, Keenan. This is what from Dr. Stacey Patton, what she says about spanking. And I'm going to read that for us because it's just a little bit. She said, African Americans adopted the practice of beating children from white slave masters. Europeans brutalized their own children for thousands of years prior to crossing the Atlantic to the New World and colonizing Africa. Historians and anthropologists have found no evidence that ritualistic forms of physical discipline of children existed in pre-colonial West African societies prior to the Atlantic slave trade. West African societies held children in a much higher regard than slave societies in the Atlantic world, which placed emphasis on Black bodies as property, not as human beings. West Africans believed that children came from the afterlife, that they were gods or reincarnated ancestors. Wow.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The ancestors, Dr. Marine Ba'ani talks about this in the circle, let the circle be unbroken, that the children, those are the spirits of the ancestors coming back to fulfill a purpose as the spirit of ancestor reborn. One of my teachers, Professor James Small, talks about how we are God having a human experience. This is understanding African cosmology. We're God having a human experience. So yeah, Dr. Stacey Patton is correct. Now, there may be corporal punishment or spanking was not something that was traditional in traditional West African societies, or basically traditional African societies, and generally speaking. Now, you may have extreme circumstances where something like that may have happened, but that was not something routine. That was not a routine form of disciplining somebody. But once again, we're coming from societies where the concept "it takes a village" is not just a title of a book by Hillary Clinton. That was a way of life for us. Okay, so you're dealing with a different whole concept of being. But yeah, she hit the nail on the head. We need to do more research on this also.
And you know what, my man Willie Frazier, one of our culture crew members, he said the Bible says, "Spare the rod, spoil the child." How is that European? Also, if you don't beat your child, the police will. The brief pain of discipline can save the long pain of European punishment. What's your take on that,
and black people are beating their children, and they're still getting beaten by police. That's not stopping the police from beating them. That's not stopping them from being killed by the police. Trayvon, you have in Cleveland, Tamir Rice. You have, we can go and look at numerous examples. Just so we have examples of African Americans. Just because you were beaten by your parents or spanked by your parents, even if you needed it, that doesn't stop the police from unjustly killing you. We're making a false equivalency. We're making a false equivalency here when we do that. And that's something that's very dangerous, because then you're giving white police officers an excuse for unjustly beating African Americans to say, "Oh, well, your parents didn't beat you, so I'm going to beat you." No, that's giving white police officers an unjust excuse to unjustly kill unarmed African Americans. And it could have been a situation where that child was disciplined by their parents. Okay, you're giving. So let me give you an example with it just happened in what state was that? With was that not Tennessee, Kentucky. Okay, in Kentucky, the 5 black police officers. Okay, did they beat the brother because he wasn't spanked by his parents?
Oh no, you talking about with the 5 black pieces that was in Memphis.
Yeah, in Memphis. Yeah, Memphis.
That was in Memphis.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, Dr. King was assassinated. Right. Memphis, where Dr. King was assassinated.
Right.
Okay, so we're trying to give white police officers or police officers in general another excuse to justify them doing the wrong thing, justify them taking the law into their own hands. No, don't buy into that. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. That doesn't mean that our children should not be disciplined. Right. There are other ways to discipline them. Okay. Right. There are other ways to discipline, taking away privileges, grounding them, taking away their allowance, things like this. But thinking that just beating the children and ignoring the science and then saying if I don't beat them, then the police will. That's a slave mentality right there. That's a slave mentality.
This is a very interesting piece. We don't have enough time to kind of delve deeper into this. But folks, I would highly recommend y'all check out Touré's piece on thegrio.com. It's very interesting, fascinating. I think there's so much more that needs to be said about corporal punishment because it is so ingrained in Black culture, in Black family life.
Because slavery is ingrained in our culture, and we have been taught to act like slaves.
Absolutely.
This is what Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about in the post-traumatic slave syndrome. You change your behavior to adjust and survive a traumatic experience. Then after that traumatic experience is over, you're not taught to adjust and change your behavior. This is what she talks about in the post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Right. And I think that's something that needs to be discussed because the other part of it, and we don't have a lot of time, Brother Michael, to get into it. But the fact is that once you start bringing in the Bible, once you start bringing in God into the conversation of an experience like this, it takes things to a higher level. And it can sometimes confuse people. Not to say that you're confused, Brother Willie, not at all. I'm just saying in general that having those conversations without understanding the proper context and how the proper context of when things were said and weren't said.
We can talk about that next week. That's misunderstanding the context. That's totally misunderstanding the context. That's totally.
Brother Michael, we got like a minute left. Talk to us about the work you're doing.
Okay, visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. Register for the online history classes I teach on Saturdays, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understand the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. You don't have to be present in the class. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. The classes on sale $60, regularly $130. Then Sundays, I teach Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement. We look at history chronologically, 1800 to 1968, to understand how we got to where we are today and the laws and policies put in place to bring us to where we are today, to understand where we need to go from here. So visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. We also have a bundle pack of both classes as well on sale for only $100.
Awesome. My brother.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you,
because that helps support the research and finance the African History Network. Thank you.
There it is right there, Brother Michael Imhotep of the African History Network. All right.